Mm-hmm. So I want to talk a bit about the chakras and how I work with them, the historical research that I've done. I mentioned something that I called the continuum of human potential. And the idea is that the continuum of human potential starts with a most basic immersion in physical experience or material experience, and then extends to some kind of connection with higher beings or powers or God consciousness. And it seems that in the Western chakra tradition, the chakras as they are experienced in the body are linked to this idea of a continuum of human potential. So the most basic chakra, the one that's called the root chakra, which is at the base of the spine, is said to correspond to survival and therefore have a strong connection to the physical body. And the topmost chakra is connected to spirit and cosmic consciousness. And then you've got 7 stages as you ascend. There are a number of different systems that describe those stages, and I want to talk about the one that I use. So in Leadbeater's teachings about the chakras, he talks about the spiritual powers that come with the activation of each chakra. And interestingly enough, he talks about them in connection with 2 of the subtle bodies. One is the etheric body, which is the body of life force. The other is the astral body, which is the body of emotion. And there's a suggestion that the mental body also has a chakra system, and that would possibly then also be true of any of the subtle bodies. And because there's such a strong parallel in his description between the etheric body chakras and the astral body chakras, that makes it seem likely that the same sequence of development operates in all the subtle bodies. So what I've done is I've extrapolated from that with a list of how the subtle bodies develop and how it's parallel in each of the bodies and how different abilities show up at each level. And it's still a continuum of human potential, but it's a little bit more advanced than the one that was brought out in Esalen, where typically first chakra was survival, second was sensuality and sexuality, third was power, fourth is heart-based relationships, love, compassion, fifth is self-expression, sixth is synthesis or integration, sometimes third eye, and the seventh is cosmic consciousness or some higher level of intuition. So the way that I think about it is the first chakra gives you the ability to experience a new body or the sense of being present in a new body. And an example of that would be when I had my first out-of-body experiences, which started when I was about 14. I didn't know where I was. I couldn't see or hear or feel anything. All I knew was that I was no longer in my bed asleep. And that's fairly typical from work that I've done on astral projection forums, helping people understand their experiences. People will have an experience of knowing that they're out of body and not having any understanding or other kind of sense experience associated with that. So I think of that as an activation of the first chakra. It just gives you the experience of being in a body. And because the experience of being in a body is related to material things and survival, in a sense, there's a cross-correlation with the idea of the Esalen chakra system, which is the one that most New Age books draw from. So the second chakra is our sense-based experience of a body. It's the body starting to reach out into its subtle body environment and pick up impressions. In the same way, in the Esalen New Age system, the second chakra is talked about as sensuality. So the idea is if you're able to experience an impression that you're not just in a body, but you're in a place, and start to pick up the atmosphere, the energetic atmosphere of the place, then the second chakra is active. Third chakra in the Esalen system is sometimes power, sometimes motivation. and that corresponds to the ability to move. So if an astral projector is developing, let's say, the ability to move about in the astral body, then they would have to have the first 3 chakras active. The first one would mean being in the body. The second would be being able to pick up impressions of the environment. And the third one would be being able to move within the environment. And all of us, regardless of our level of spiritual development, have at least that much development in the astral body because we dream. And in our dreams, we have the experience of being in a different body, picking up sense impressions from that body and moving around. So the 4th chakra has to do with compassion in the Esalen New Age system. And in Leadbeater and in the way I think about it, it has to do with empathy. And it's our ability to sense the presence of other beings, to identify those other beings. So for example, a lot of astral projectors will find, beginning ones will find that they're in another environment, but they don't perceive other beings. And they'll sometimes believe that they're in an environment that is absent of beings. But it may be because the 4th chakra isn't operating. And this is especially true of some of the more techie, nerdy types of astral projectors. For some reason, their heart center doesn't seem to be as active as in other people. And as a consequence, they don't have the degree of empathy that even allows them to perceive that there are other beings in the environment. So if, for example, you're having a moment of connection with a pet, that would be a 4th chakra experience. Not necessarily in the physical body or the etheric body, but possibly through the astral body. And this builds to the point where if you're traveling in the astral body and you encounter other beings, you can identify whether they are less developed than you are, equally developed, or more developed, where they come from, what their purpose is, and things of this nature. So then, moving on to the 5th chakra, the 5th chakra is the ability to communicate with the other entities. And this also is typically a problem for a lot of the astral projectors that I've worked with on forums. They have developed the first 3. They don't see the beings, or if they see them, they can't communicate with them. And part of the problem with that is the method of communication when you're working on the non-physical planes of being is a kind of telepathy, but it's feeling-based. And most of us are so developed in our mental bodies that when we communicate, we think too much in terms of words and concepts. And I actually had a set of lessons that occurred maybe 25 to 30 years ago where I learned what I call feel-think, which that's my word for the language of non-physical reality, where I was trying to talk with a being, and whenever I said anything that was feeling-based, the being heard me. And whenever I said anything, when I would get excited and talk about a concept, the being would say, I thought you were going to say something. They didn't get it at all. So the 6th chakra is the one that brings everything together. It integrates and synthesizes our experience when we're out of body. And I think it does the same thing at all levels of our being. It is possible to have the 6th chakra operating without the 4th and 5th. So it's not like people's development through the bodies is always from the bottom up. There can be gaps. And you can perceive things fairly accurately, except there may be no beings or you may not be able to communicate with them, which means that the 4th and the 5th chakras need some work. And then finally, the 7th chakra is a kind of disentanglement from the conceptual or perceptual biases of the plane that we're operating on. And I think of it in terms of transcendence. It allows us to transcend that plane and then begin the process of building a new body on the next higher plane through the same set of chakras, but in a more subtle environment. So I think of the chakras, therefore, as a way of talking about how our subtle bodies develop. And I believe that the template that I just gave you is the same for every subtle body. So in the etheric body, with respect to the development of our ability to be responsive to subtle elements of the physical planes, such as fairies or devas or nature spirits, we would have to have the fourth and fifth chakras of the etheric body developed in order for that experience to be available. Astral plane, lucid dreaming, astral traveling, those things come with a more fully developed astral body. It's possible to travel on the mental plane also, and beyond. And in each case, what you perceive on these planes develops from how many of the chakras are operating. Now, this is not something that I'll be teaching you how to do, but the practices of working with the chakras are pretty much the same for all the bodies. And some of my students quite spontaneously find that they're able to perceive the chakras multidimensionally, which means that through engaging with the positions that the chakras are said to be in along the central core of the body, they bring in their energy hands and they're able to experience a level that corresponds to each of the bodies. Now, it takes a fairly refined sense of discernment to be able to tell the difference between one body and another. But as you experiment with the chakras today, you may find that some of these perceptions show up.